Sean Spicer out. The White House press secretary calls it quits. We have a report on what led up to the announcement. Scrambling for votes. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi speaks to Senator Marco Rubio, head of the Senate healthcare vote next week. Remembering Father Arnie. We look back at the life of a priest who leaves behind a rich legacy in our nation's capital. And one-on-one with the originalist. Part 2 of Lauren Ashburn's conversation with the actor playing the late Justice Antonin Scalia. On EWTN News Nightly for Friday, July 21st, 2017. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer is stepping down. The embattled spokesman for President Trump held the job for the first 6 months of the presidency. Correspondent Mark Irons is at the White House with the details. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. The White House announced today Sarah Huckabee Sanders will be the new press secretary, and New York financier Anthony Scaramucci formally takes on the role of White House communications director. At today's press briefing, Scaramucci thanked Sean Spicer for his service and called him a true American patriot.
Sean decided that he thought it would be better to go, and for me, as it relates to Sean, it speaks volumes to who he is as a human being, who he is as a team player. Okay, so his attitude is, if Anthony's coming in, let me clear the slate for Anthony, and I do appreciate that about Sean, and I love him for it.
Sean Spicer's daily press briefings were lively and sometimes contentious, making them must-see television. In recent weeks, he has taken a more behind-the-scenes role. His former deputy press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, has largely taken over the briefings, which are often off-camera now. Sanders will now be permanently filling Spicer's shoes. Today, she was asked why Spicer resigned.
He understood that the president wanted to bring in and add new people to the team, and Sean felt like it would be best for that team to be able to start with a totally clean slate.
Sean Spicer spent several years running communications at the Republican National Committee before helping Trump's campaign. He is also a Catholic and was dealt a blow when Trump excluded him from a group of staffers who got to meet the Pope in May. Spicer has been a guest on our show and even came to our chapel for Ash Wednesday Mass this year. Wyatt.
Mark, the off-camera briefings have caused controversy among the White House press corps. Will they continue?
That is not clear. I did ask Anthony Scaramucci how involved President Trump will be in White House communications going forward. He told me he will be, quote, as involved as he wants to be. He is the president. Scaramucci says he has Oval Office privileges, meaning access to the president as needed.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thanks, Mark. President Trump's legal team is evaluating potential conflicts of interest among members of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigative team as they probe into Russia's election meddling. Mueller has announced that he will expand the scope of the investigation to include the Trump family's business ties. In an interview Wednesday with the New York Times, Trump warned Mueller it would be a violation if he investigated the Trump family's financial entanglements. The White House says the president has no intention of firing Mueller, quote, at this time, but they are not ruling out doing so in the future. Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor, testifies behind closed doors on Monday to the Senate Judiciary Committee. This after news broke, he attended a meeting with a Russian lawyer. Let's go back to the White House for more on the Russia investigation. Joining us now is Mark Lauder, Vice President Mike Pence's press secretary. Mark, the probe into the Russian meddling in the election seems to be preventing the White House from working on its agenda. At least it's been a distraction. Can the White House move beyond all of this and be effective?
What I can tell you, Wyatt, is that the Vice President, the President are entirely focused on moving the President's agenda forward. Just this afternoon, the Vice President hosted over a dozen conservative groups to his office here at the White House, talking about getting together, making sure that the American people reach out to their senators and talk about the need next week to move forward on repealing and replacing Obamacare. That's where we're focused right now. That's where the President and the Vice President remain focused. And we're going to work every day to make sure that we're advancing the agenda that the American people sent President Trump and Vice President Pence to Washington to accomplish.
Well, speaking of health care, Senator Mitch McConnell hopes the vote on the GOP health care bill will come next week. It comes after a week of setbacks for the GOP. What is the Vice President doing to make sure the GOP comes up with a good bill, and how involved is he in this process?
Well, the vice president and the president are both very involved. The president had all of the Republican senators over for lunch the other day. Both the president and vice president are making phone calls. Secretary Price, the director of Medicaid Services, Seema Verma, is meeting individually with senators, answering their questions, talking about the concerns they may have about the impacts in their states, but really working to bring people together, because the Republicans have been talking about this for 7.5 years. The president campaigned on this. It's time for the Senate to step forward, the Congress to do its job, and next week is the time that we're going to get that done. We're going to see moving forward on repealing and replacing Obamacare. It's what the American people sent Republicans to Washington to accomplish.
Pro-life leaders say they want the bill to defund Planned Parenthood and keep the Hyde Amendment, which bans federal funding for abortions. Is the vice president working with the senators on those two issues?
The bill as it stands right now would defund Planned Parenthood, and it would make sure that federal tax subsidies, federal tax credits are not able to be used for insurance that provides abortion services. Those are things that the president, the vice president are very committed to. It's currently in the Senate legislation on the replacement side, and so what you're seeing is us put the president putting forward those conservative principles that he ran on into action, but we need the Senate to take action, move this process forward. Now's the time for action.
Last week, we saw a picture of evangelicals praying with the president. And of course, the vice president, Pence, is very open about his faith and his prayer life. Is he having an impact on the president spiritually?
Well, obviously, the president and the vice president have a very close personal relationship, and they work together. I wouldn't obviously begin to discuss the impacts and how they might have private conversations with each other. But I can tell you that this president has shown from the very beginning of his administration, as he promised that he would protect the rights of those people of faith and actually put conservative judges on our federal courts who will respect those rights. He is following through on that action, and he's following through his commitment to the American people to continue to move conservative principles forward here in Washington, D.C.
So many important issues there to talk about when it comes to the White House agenda. Mark Lauder, Vice President Mike Pence's press secretary, thanks so much for talking with us about it.
Thank you.
Vice President Mike Pence encourages pro-life leaders to help build support for the Republican health care bill. Included in the discussion, the March for Life's Jeannie Mancini, Marjorie Dannenfelser with the Susan B. Anthony list, Penny Nance from the Concerned Women for America, and Matt Schlapp from American Conservative Union.
That's great. And we just urge you in the days that remain between now and this vote early next week to reach out to people across this country and let them know that we're close. We literally are just a few votes away from beginning a debate that will repeal and replace Obamacare.
And as pro-lifers meet at the White House, Senate leaders scramble for support ahead of the health care vote early next week. The U.S. bishops urge the Senate not to repeal Obamacare without a replacement plan. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us with the latest. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Wyatt. Lawmakers head home for the weekend without knowing which version of the Republican health care plan will be voted on next week. The first vote early next week is to open up debate. Senator John McCain's illness poses another problem since Republicans need his vote to succeed. I asked Catholic Senator Marco Rubio about that. How can the vote next week succeed without Senator McCain here?
Yeah, well, hopefully we have at least 50 people that are prepared to proceed, which is what the vote is on. If Democrats believe Obamacare is so great and worthy of preservation, or that we need to be fixing Obamacare, they should vote to proceed so we can get on this bill and they can offer their ideas. If Republicans, who have all run on the promise of repealing it and replacing it, are serious about that, they should vote to proceed so we can get on the bill and begin to have that debate. I don't know why anybody would be against it. The Democrats believe Obamacare should be tweaked. Republicans believe it should be repealed and replaced. We can't start the process of doing that. Also, people have to understand that this reconciliation thing is the most open process you can imagine. Unlimited debates. Literally, this could take 6 months until people run out of amendments. I think this is perfect. This is the ability to debate health care in front of the entire country on the Senate floor. That's what the Senate was supposed to be about, a place where people came, offered their ideas, had these debates, and then voted. And that's what this will give us a chance to do, but we can't do it if we're not on the bill.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is making a similar pitch to holdout Republicans. He says dealing with the issue is right for the country, and Wyatt, the U.S. bishops are writing every U.S. senator saying they shouldn't repeal Obamacare without a replacement that protects the poor, the unborn, and conscience rights.
It's an important point there. Correspondent Jason Calvi at the Capitol. Thanks, Jason. A powerful overnight earthquake shakes holiday resorts in Greece and Turkey, killing 2 people and injuring nearly 500 more. The 2 tourists who died were at a bar that collapsed on the Greek island of Kos. Video and pictures show rubble on the ground and other victims being rushed to hospitals. Aftershocks kept people on edge throughout the night. Some chose to sleep outside rather than risk another building collapse. 3 Palestinians are dead and dozens hospitalized after clashes with Israeli forces. Protests erupted after Israel installed metal detectors at a major shrine in Jerusalem's Old City following an attack that killed 2 police officers. And late today, the violence grew worse. Israel says a Palestinian suspect stabbed 3 Israelis, killing 2 of them. The U.S. says it will ban American citizens from traveling to North Korea without a special validation passport. The State Department says the decision was made due to serious risk of arrest and long-term detention under North Korea's system of law enforcement. The ban begins in late August. A special passport may be granted for certain humanitarian purposes. All this comes following the death of Otto Warmbier, who passed away after falling into a coma in a North Korean prison. A hospital lawyer tells the parents of Charlie Gard the results of their son's latest brain scans make for sad reading. Charlie's parents got the bad news at a pre-court hearing today in London. They are fighting to keep him alive, despite doctors telling them he has suffered irreversible brain damage. An American doctor from New York is in London to promote an experimental treatment that may offer some hope. The family has also received the support of Pope Francis and President Donald Trump. Joining us now is Melissa Muscella, Assistant Professor of Medical Ethics in the Department of Medicine at Columbia University. Melissa, you wrote an op-ed for USA Today. The headline is, "Charlie Gard Case Threatens All Parents." How so?
Well, the Charlie Gard case threatens all parents because it sets a precedent that the state is the primary decision maker when it comes to anything of any controversy in terms of what's in the best interests of the child. Clearly, in normal situations, the automatic proxy decision maker for the child or for anybody who's incompetent would be the next of kin, in this case the parents. But here the state has stepped in, taken guardianship of Charlie, despite the fact that he has perfectly loving, competent parents to make decisions on his behalf.
You write a little bit more detail about that in the article, saying, quote, "Reasonable people can disagree about what is best for Charlie, but principle and law are clear on who has the primary authority to determine his fate." You say that that answer is obvious. It's Charlie's parents. So why do the parents trump the state?
Well, you could think about this philosophically or legally. Philosophically, you have to recognize that the family, in the central case, parents and their children, they are a pre-political unit, a unit that exists prior to the state. It's not that the state invented the family or invented the obligations that parents have for their children and the authority that parents have to make decisions on behalf of their children. That would exist even if we didn't have a political community. So the state needs to respect that as an authority that's prior to itself. And legally, that's been recognized in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the European Convention, many U.S. Supreme Court cases. It's very clear across the board that parents are the primary decision makers on behalf of their children.
The Telegraph, a British newspaper, reports the government lawyer representing Charlie Gard in court is the chairman of Compassion in Dying, a group that advocates for assisted suicide. As a medical ethicist, do you see this as a conflict of interest?
Yes, there's clearly a conflict of interest here that the lawyer, Mrs. Victoria Butler Cole, is an avid advocate for physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia, so she clearly stands on one radical end of the spectrum in terms of her views about what makes a life worth living. And her views clearly are that certain lives simply are better off not being lived. That certain people, if they're going to be suffering or severely disabled with no hope of a cure, would be better off dead. So she's clearly on one side of the issue here. So when she's advocating for Charlie's best interests, basically, it's no surprise that she's going to advocate to have him taken off of life support.
Melissa Muscella, Assistant Professor of Medical Ethics at Columbia University. Thanks so much for telling us about the case.
Thank you.
Coming up, spiritual protest. Hundreds of people rally against religious persecution in China. And a priest who helped foster the faith in the heart of Washington's power corridor. How he's being remembered tonight. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. More than 1,000 people from across the country rally in the nation's capital calling for an end to religious persecution in China. Supporters of a minority spiritual group called Falun Gong gathered next to the Capitol building to protest the Chinese Communist Party. They say its 18-year persecution of Falun Gong practitioners is the longest-running human rights crisis since the country's Cultural Revolution. China banned the spiritual practice in 1999, calling it evil. Joining us now is Danielle Mark, chairman of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, a bipartisan federal commission dedicated to protecting religious freedom. So Danielle, you spoke this week at a rally in support of Falun Gong practitioners. Tell us a bit about the practice of Falun Gong and why the Chinese government has been persecuting these people.
The Falun Gong practitioners engage in a spiritual and meditative practice based on their three virtues of truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. And the Chinese government sees this as a threat and has been persecuting them very badly since 1999. What is it about that is so threatening? Well, like any totalitarian regime, anything that creates a civil space outside of government control is a threat. It spread very quickly after its introduction in China in 1992, and now the government feels threatened by something spreading and claiming people's allegiance. According to your commission's annual report, the government regularly imprisons Falun Gong practitioners. They also experiment them on medical experiments. Tell me exactly what they're doing. Well, it's really horrifying. In addition to imprisonment, very frequent torture, and all kinds of grotesque practices, one of the most famous things is harvesting of organs from Falun Gong practitioners, where literally people are executed illegally in most cases, and then their organs are used and sold. Is absolutely horrifying. How do you characterize, noting that the state of religious freedom in China right now? Is it just Falun Gong practitioners, or are others being persecuted as well? No one has religious freedom in China. All the people are persecuted there in one way or another. How long has it been like this? This is a feature of communism. The communist regime enforces its ideological atheism by preventing really anyone, and insofar as there is any religious practice, it's only under the control of the government and under state-approved churches and pastors and bishops. What then do you think is USCIRF's recommendation to the U.S. government in addressing this problem? Well, we've been designating China as a country of particular concern since the beginning of the commission. The State Department always agrees with us on this, but we need to take more action. For example, to use the Global Magnitsky Act to prosecute people who are intolerant, people who persecute others, to prevent them from traveling freely around the world and so on. Let's talk about the Catholic Church's relationship, because obviously here at EWTN, we continue to report on that. What is it like for Catholics in China? Sure, it's a long-standing problem, a very complicated relationship. Once again, the Chinese government only permits state-approved bishops to preside. There is an underground Catholic Church as well, and the Vatican has been trying to negotiate an agreement with China to allow properly ordained bishops and priests to operate there, but it's a very delicate situation, and the Vatican can hopefully find a way to do this that doesn't leave the underground church in the lurch. And it's so important that we shine a light on this situation. Danielle Mark, chairman of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, thanks so much for talking with us. Thank you very much. A judge orders pro-life activists to stay away from a buffer zone outside Kentucky's only abortion clinic. The district judge issued the temporary restraining order as a preemptive move ahead of a planned protest. The judge's action applies to anyone acting in concert or participation with pro-life activities. In May, police say nearly a dozen pro-lifers were arrested for blocking access to the Louisville clinic. County Clerk Kim Davis is back in the news. A federal judge has ordered Kentucky taxpayers to pay more than $220,000 in attorney's fees in the case against her. The judge says Davis was acting on behalf of the state when she refused to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples based on her personal religious beliefs. Tonight we remember Father Arnie Panola. We last saw him at the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast during the closing prayer.
May the blessing of Almighty God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit descend upon us and remain forever. Amen.
Father Panola passed away Wednesday after a long battle with cancer. He was ordained a priest in 1973 and served in California, New York, and Washington, D.C. He was the U.S. Vicar of Opus Dei from 1998 until 2002. He's being remembered this week for his deep faith.
His legacy is his care for individual souls. I mean, anybody who met Father Arnie, who knew Father Arnie, has his legacy inscribed in his heart and in his mind and his soul, because he was so caring, so deep, so insightful, so loving.
Here in Washington, D.C., Father Arnie was the director of the Catholic Information Center, where he gave spiritual direction to many. Up next, The Originalist. how faith plays a central role in a play based on the late Supreme Court justice.
So much a part of who Scalia, was a deeply committed Roman Catholic.
And Bishop on a Bike, his unusual fundraiser. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. Tonight we air our second and final sit-down interview with Edward Jarrow, the actor portraying Justice Antonin Scalia in the political drama play The Originalist. Jarrow tells Lauren Ashburn about his personal memories, including his shared Catholic faith with the late Justice.
Welcome back. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
You and Justice Scalia share an Italian heritage and your Catholic faith, and you talked about faith with Justice Scalia. Tell me about those conversations.
We had a good time about that. I was an altar boy. My mother would want me to say that that's how I started out in this business. On the
Performing on the altar.
Right.
Right.
And thinking I was going to be a priest, and that changed. But we talked about the great divide of the Second Vatican Council. He's a Tridentine Mass man.
Yes. Latin Mass.
Latin Mass. And he said, I used to love to go to church and sing in the choir, and then suddenly the Vatican II happened, and they were singing Kumbaya with guitars. I said, I didn't like the music. So I said, well,
Talk about being a traditionalist.
Oh, exactly. I said, well, I made the transition, having started with Latin Mass, and I was the guy playing the guitar, by the way.
You were the Kumbaya.
Exactly. So we were clearly of a different generation. But we talked about the new Pope. We talked about Italy and the Vatican, and it was just a really, he was very open about that.
Well, you just said at one point you considered being a priest and went to the seminary. How does your faith guide this performance?
Well, so much a part of who Scalia, was a deeply committed Roman Catholic. And the play deals with that. In fact, the characters in the play share Catholicism. The counter clerk is a bit of a fallen away Catholic, and part of the character's goal is to recapture that and to have her find her sense of direction from her faith. And that comes to fruition in the play. So when we started rehearsals, we made a trip to the Basilica, lit a candle. I've been going to Mass a little bit more regularly now. He'd be very happy to hear that.
Yes, okay.
But no, it just there's a certain comfort level about it that he made me at ease with it and actually got me interested again in a way.
We have a picture of you, and we'll show right now, of you paying your respects to Justice Scalia as he's lying in repose at the Supreme Court. What were you thinking at that moment? What was your prayer?
I said a Hail Mary. That was an extraordinary moment because I was among the first group of Americans to get in line, and there were cameras everywhere, and I didn't want to be recognized, but apparently I was, and my wife and I were about to go in, and one of the marshals said, wait. I said, just wait. And he said, okay, go ahead. And we had the room to ourselves. Oh. So it was incredibly overwhelming. And I just had such a profound sense of loss for, not just personally, but what he meant to the country. He was such the smartest person I ever met in my life. And I was just grateful to have the time I had with him. So yeah, I've said a Hail Mary.
Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your relationship with him.
Thank you.
With our audience.
Thank you very much.
The Originalist runs until August 6th at Arena Stage in Washington. Finally tonight, the Bishop of Erie, Pennsylvania participates in a fundraiser where you wouldn't expect to see a high-ranking Catholic clergy member. Bishop Lawrence Persico hopped on the back of a Harley-Davidson motorcycle to take part in the Roar on the Shore charity ride. Catholic News Service says he was raising money for the Sisters of Mercy and their Mercy Center for Women. It was the first time he'd ever been on a motorcycle. And by the way, that motorcycle was the only one that featured a Vatican flag. We thank you for watching tonight and for this entire week. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'll see you back here on Monday. Good night and God bless.